to this video on how standards are embedded into qualifications. Here we focus on how this is done in Wales, though most of what we cover is very similar for school leaving exams around the world. I'm Michelle Meadows, Associate Professor at the Oxford University Centre for Educational Assessment. One way of thinking about the design and delivery of qualifications is as a life cycle. We can break the life cycle down into many different parts, each with an important role to play in the validity of the qualification and its standard. The term standard is used in lots of different ways. The standard of the content to be learned, the standard that's applied when marking student work, the standard of performance needed to achieve a particular grade. I could go on. And that's because standards are embedded throughout the qualification life cycle. In this film, we're going to divide the life cycle up into 4 big chunks. The initial design of the qualification, the development of the specifications and sample assessment materials, then the delivery of the qualification, and finally there's a stage of review so that future life cycles of the qualification can be improved. And I'm going to discuss how standards are embedded at each of these stages with Richard Harry. Richard's worked in qualifications for many years. He's a responsible officer at WJEC, the Welsh Exam Board. So Richard, let's first focus on the design phase. What happens in this stage and how does it affect standards?
So in the design phase, the subject content and assessment objectives are set out. In other words, what is being measured is defined. Of course, how stretching and challenging the subject content is affects the standard of a GCSE, and some assessment objectives such as the recall of knowledge may be easier to master than others, such as the evaluation of ideas. The weighting of the assessment objectives, how much they count in the final grade and how they're assessed can affect standards too. The structure of the qualifications, the form of the assessments and assessment procedures are also design decisions. In other words, how attainment is going to be measured is decided, and these can all impact on standards. One big design decision is whether to allow modularity, and some students find it easier to perform well on modular qualifications which give the opportunity to take assessments through the course of study and to resit exams. The feedback from the modules can help students to improve their performance. Others will prefer linear qualifications in which all of the assessments are taken at the end of a course of study. Some policymakers prefer linear exams because they are more demanding and so, in their view, set a higher standard. In reality, it isn't so straightforward because there are many other things that affect standards, not least where the grade boundaries are drawn. How much coursework to include in a qualification is another design decision. Again, some students will perform best on coursework, others on exams. In general, students get higher marks on coursework than on exams. There are long-standing concerns that some teachers and parents may give students too much support when they're working on coursework, which would be unfair and also undermine standards. There is also the worry that students may use artificial intelligence to help them do well. All the same, there are some skills that cannot be validly assessed in an exam. All of these qualification design features can have a profound effect on standards. So the exam regulator will often set design rules and there is a qualification approval process to check that they are met.
Getting the design right is very important because any weakness at this stage will reduce the validity of the qualification and affect standards. It's very difficult to fix design problems at a later stage. The very best you can do is limit any damage. Richard, let's move on to the development stage. What happens in this stage and how does it affect standards?
In the development phase of the life cycle, the exam board creates specifications or syllabuses and specimen assessment materials, exam papers, coursework tasks, and mark schemes. Once approved by the regulator, these are a key way in which the expectations regarding the standards of the qualification are communicated to teachers and to students. And knowing what's expected of learners can improve performance standards. Also, sometimes grade descriptors are developed. The idea is that these help teachers by giving an idea of the likely level of performance needed to get key grades, grade A, grade C, grade F, for example. But they're always written at a high level because GCSEs are compensatory qualifications, and this means that shortcomings in some areas of students' performance may be balanced by better performances in other areas. And that makes writing detailed grade descriptors impossible, and is why they're not always produced.
So once we've designed and developed the qualifications and they're ready to be delivered, well, there's a lot that goes on in this stage. The live assessments are written and they're sent to schools, coursework is undertaken, the exams are set, they are marked, grade boundaries are set, and there's the opportunity for schools to appeal if they think there's an error in the marking. Richard, can you give us the highlights in this stage?
Yes, there's a lot that goes on. The question papers are written with the aim that they are of the same overall standard as those sat in previous years. But in reality, even the most experienced examiners find it impossible to write papers of the exact same difficulty. But that's the aim, so the standards are not undermined by easier and easier exams being set over time. The mark scheme is important too. Mark schemes are constructed at the same time as the question papers are written. Making sure that the right responses receive the right marks is what we call the marking standard. Examiners are trained to apply the mark scheme correctly, and their marking is continually monitored. This is usually done by seeding. Items that have already been marked by a senior examiner are seeded through a batch of marking. And if they aren't awarded the same mark or a very close mark, then the examiner will be stopped and retrained.
So grading is also part of the delivery phase, and when people talk about standards, often they actually mean grading standards where the grade boundaries are drawn. Of course, this has a big impact on the standard of qualification. So Richard, how do exam boards maintain grade standards?
So once marking is complete, grade boundaries are set for each GCSE subject, and this is done by an awarding committee. Only boundaries for key grades are set. These are A, C and F in a non-tiered GCSE. The other grade boundaries for intermediate grades are calculated arithmetically. Awarding committees are chaired by a senior examiner who has responsibility for standards in each subject. And the committees also include principal examiners who are responsible for examined units, principal moderators who are responsible for coursework units, and exam board technical experts. The meeting may be held face-to-face or online. And the aim is to maintain year on year the level of attainment at a grade boundary mark. While it is intended to design exam papers at the same level of demand as in previous years, there is no pre-testing of exam questions, and so in practice this is very difficult. And this means that grade boundaries have to be adjusted according to the demand of the exam. An easier paper will require higher boundaries, a harder paper will need lower boundaries. Different sources of evidence are used when setting boundaries, both statistical and judgmental. And this approach is described in the academic literature as attainment referencing. At GCSE, the main statistical evidence is the outcome of centres that are common to the reference year and the current year. And the assumption is that the outcomes for these common centres will be stable from one year to the next. On this basis, results can be predicted for those common centres, and the predictions guide the setting of boundaries which are then applied to all students. Statistical information is a very helpful starting point for the awarding committee, but the committee also look at student work at a range of marks, including the boundaries suggested by the statistics. And according to the quality of student performance compared to previous years, the boundaries may ultimately be higher or lower than the statistics suggest.
In the review phase, many different evaluations on how things have gone are carried out. They may be routine or in response to specific issues. Richard, can you tell us more about the routine monitoring that exam boards do?
Yes, we routinely review how exam papers have functioned. We look at the mean mark, the spread of marks, the spread of grade boundaries and so on. and also how individual questions have functioned, their facility, how difficult the students found them, and discrimination, how well the questions have differentiated between students with different levels of ability. And the findings are then fed into the next cycle of exam paper production. Lots of other data is reviewed too. For example, data from the quality assurance and marking, mark changes resulting from the marking review process, and cases of maladministration and malpractice.
And what kinds of bespoke evaluations are conducted and why?
All sorts of bespoke evaluations are also conducted depending on the issues that arise as qualifications are delivered and the feedback received from schools. For example, studies of whether standards are changing over time, which involve extensive expert scrutiny of the quality of students' work, or marking reliability studies in which exams are remarked by senior examiners. And this kind of work helps us improve the quality of assessment and to build trust in qualifications.
Thanks, Richard, for giving us that overview of the qualification lifecycle.
Thank you.
If you want to read more about how standards are embedded at each stage of the life cycle, then read our report, Standards in GCSEs in Wales, Approaches to Defining Standards. Thank you.